And so Jesus continued to demonstrate love. He was the one that would befriend, the people that religion rejected. And he was the one that befriended prostitutes and tax collectors. He was the one that would reach out and touch the leper, the one that had been cast aside and segregated by all of society, who hadn't experienced physical touch for who knows how many years. Jesus reached out and he touched them. He showed and he demonstrated the love of God in a real way. And the more he loved, the more they hated. But he just kept on loving, because love isn't just something that our God does. Love is who he is. For me, it honestly is the most wonderful time of the year, and I love it. I love that we take time out of our normal routines just to connect with family and friends. I love this sense of Christmas that just sweeps through our community, and it literally turns strangers into neighbors. And there's something about the ability of people to open their homes and extend invitations and just meet needs and share love and generosity. I mean, it's everything that Radical Christmas is all about. Christmas trees, decorated. It's time for a confession. I only set mine up last week. I know. Normally it is up like first week in November, but we were so busy getting Christmas here at the junction that I had no time to Christmasify my own house. But it got rectified last weekend. The tree is up. In fact, most of this message was written with me gazing at the lights on my Christmas tree and just inhaling the scent of my mistletoe kisses candle that was burning brightly, and whilst perhaps watching a Hallmark movie or two. I mean, Christmas, right? Any of you picking up what I'm putting down? Like fellow Hallmark Christmas lover right there. I love this time of the year. And I could give you a list a mile long about everything that I love about Christmas. But mostly, what I love about Christmas is that it reminds me of the hope that I have in Jesus. C.S. Lewis called Christmas the grand miracle. The grand miracle. It is the most real, the most powerful, the greatest love story ever told. And the entire reason for Christmas is the love of God. A love so great that he would come to earth so that we could know him, so that we could have life here and now, but also eternity with him. So that through the coming of his son Jesus, we could have relationship with God and know that we are never alone. Emmanuel, God with us. And over the last few weeks, we have been in a series all about what it means to live in and to know the presence of God. And we've talked about the fact that sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to sense his presence when you're in a valley, when you're in the wilderness, or when you feel like you're in the midst of a storm. And it's sometimes harder to feel his presence when you feel like maybe life isn't going the way that you thought or imagined it would go. Maybe you've just received some bad news. Maybe, you're worried and you're hurting and you're anxious and you're afraid. And it's been a big year. It's been a massive year for all of us. We are still in the midst of this global continuing pandemic, and that results in job insecurities and border closures that mean that we're separated from friends and family and, everything else that comes with life as we currently know it. And then you add to that just what happens in all of life in general, with family and friends as we just live out life. And through it all, the beauty of what happened that first Christmas remains with us. God is with us. We can know the abundant peace, the incredible joy, and the hope of Jesus, regardless of whether we are in the valley, the wilderness, or the storm, because he came to us. What began at Christmas continues to change our lives today. And so this morning, as we gather for this last Sunday morning in 2021, I thought that we could read the Christmas story together. Would that be all right? And this last verse is sort of been our key verse for this whole series that we've been going through. So it's the book of Matthew chapter 1, and we're going to read from verses 18 through to 23. It says, "This is how Jesus, the Messiah, was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit." Continues and says, "Joseph, to whom she was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to publicly disgrace her, so he decided to break the engagement quietly." Thanks, Joseph. This woman who in another version of scripture, I think it's in Luke, has just been told that she's highly favored, is now about to have her life completely changed. And Joseph is like, "It's all right. We'll just break it off quietly. Don't worry. You can just handle the ridicule on your own." But thankfully, something happens and an angel appears. And so he says, as he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. And what did the angel say? "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. She will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And all of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. And here it is, the verse that we have been unpacking for the last few weeks. "Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. God is with us, the very cornerstone of our Christian faith, the incarnation, that God became flesh. John chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 says something pretty cool. It says, "In the beginning," and many of you would be familiar with this, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He was with God in the beginning. And then if you go a little bit further down in that passage, in verse 14, it says that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. "We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Emmanuel, God with us. Into a broken and weary world, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was with God in the beginning, enters via a pretty unconventional way. Mary, the young girl devoted to God, is chosen to bear the very Son of God. And Jesus left the grandeur of heaven and he entered Mary's womb for 9 months, so that he could be born of a woman, fully God and fully human. Not born in a palace, as would be, expected and fitting of a king, but instead he was born next to farm animals, because he came for everyone. Not just the rich and the powerful, but for everyone. And he came with great power. And sometimes I like to imagine what Jesus would have been like as a child. Like when he got told as a 6-year-old to go and have a bath, did he part the waters and say, "Not today, Mary"? But, as he grew, he started to learn a skill, and his earthly dad, Joseph, taught him what it was like to be a carpenter and to work with wood. And soon the miracles began to happen. Water to wine, blind eye, oh, Cameron's happy about that one. Blind eyes opened, deaf ears made to hear again, calm to the storms, and people even raised from the dead. And even whilst all of these miracles were happening, the religious people mocked him. They grew angry with him. They called him a lunatic and dangerous and an enemy. But Jesus continued to demonstrate love. He continued to be moved by compassion. I love that phrase, moved by compassion. At the start of the year, I don't know if you remember, but when Pastor Kev was talking about the word for our church for this year, he said that we would see kingdom momentum as a people if we, the same way as Jesus, would be moved by compassion. And so Jesus continued to demonstrate love. He was the one that would befriend the people that religion rejected. And he was the one that befriended prostitutes and tax collectors. He was the one that would reach out and touch the leper, the one that had been cast aside and segregated by all of society, who hadn't experienced physical touch for who knows how many years. Jesus reached out and he touched them. He showed and he demonstrated the love of God in a real way. And the more he loved, the more they hated. But he just kept on loving, because love isn't just something that our God does. Love is who he is. I'm going to say that again. Love isn't just something that our God does. Love is who he is. And he gathered his disciples, and for 3 years he poured into them, and he modeled for them, and he invested into them, and he loved them. One betrayed him, another one denied him, and they all abandoned him in his greatest hour of need. And then he went to the cross. And that same wood that he had used, and he'd learnt to use in his lifetime as a carpenter, now became the torture instrument of his death. And he could have walked away. In a moment, he could have beckoned an army of angels, but he didn't. Scripture says that he turned his face like flint. He looked towards Jerusalem steadfastly and determinedly, and he resolutely made his way to Jerusalem, thinking of mankind, thinking of you and I. And he cried out to his Father God in the garden, saying, "Take this cup from me." And he sweated droplets of blood. Such was his despair. And then he surrendered his will to the Father. And with a crown of thorns pressed onto his head, and with nails piercing his hands and his feet, degraded, beaten, he was placed on the cross, pierced for our sins, bruised for our peace. And he took on our sin, and he died. And he was separated for the first time from his Father. But 3 days later, the stone was rolled away, and Jesus was not there, because he had conquered sin and he had conquered death, and he was raised to life. And this sacrifice, once and for all, made a way for you and for I and for all mankind to be reconciled to God, to know the grace and the mercy and the forgiveness and the love of our God. And then Jesus, speaking to his followers after he has risen from the dead, but before he ascends into heaven to sit at the right hand of God, he reminds them of this incredible promise. And he charges his followers with the mission that you and I would continue the story. And he says in Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age." I am with you always. The Holy Spirit, the promised one, our comforter, our counselor, our guide, our ever-present help. He sent his Spirit to dwell in us and to work in and through us. And this story, this good news of the gospel, is why I love Christmas. It's the grand miracle that God loved you and I enough to leave heaven and come to earth. In a time when there was distrust and political unrest, and when people were hurting and lonely and broken and weary, he came. Why? Because mankind needed rescue. because we were looking for a savior, because we were in need of redemption. It's not much different today, is it? Jesus came, love in action, because he is love. He came to bring life and life to the full. He didn't just come for the righteous, but he came for the sinners. He came to show us the love of God. God could have shouted his love from the heavens. Instead, he showed it to us on earth. John 3:16 says that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him wouldn't perish, but would have everlasting life. God's love for you is unconditional. It's not based on what you could do, what you could achieve. It's based on who he is. His love is unchanging, and everything else in your lifetime might change, could change, but his love is steady. His love is continuous and constant. And if that is not the foundation for joy in our lives, then I don't know what is. For God so loved the world that he gave his son Jesus. And remember this Christmas that sweet little baby boy that we sing about and see pictured in the Nativity, he didn't remain a little baby boy. He was the Son of God, and he grew to manhood, and he modeled for us the kind of life that we should live, and he taught us truth. And in his incredible love, he paid for every sin that we would commit on the cross. And when they nailed him to that cross, and they stretched out one hand either side of his body, and the nails pierced his hands, Jesus was physically demonstrating, I love you this much, that I would die in your place. Love came down and it changed our story forever. He could have shouted his love from heaven, but he showed it to us on earth. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. God is with us. And when you believe that, when you catch a revelation of that in your heart, oh my goodness, it changes everything, doesn't it? And regardless of whether you're in the valley or in the middle of a storm or you're in the wilderness, we can have joy because God is with us. And you can know that God is for you and that he is working all things together for good. It's more than an intellectual, written on a piece of paper truth. It is a deep down in your soul, dependable, unchangeable truth deep in your heart. My God is with me. I love what Pastor Kev shared last week. He was talking to us about the fact that God is with us in the storm. And one of my favorite scriptures or stories in the New Covenant is one that Pastor Kev shared. And I just wanted to touch on it again this morning. It was from the book of Mark. And it was where we read about the disciples jumping into a boat with Jesus and this massive storm comes up. And it says that a furious storm comes up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And the disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And so he got up, rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down and it was completely calm. Perhaps this morning when you read that passage, you feel like it kind of is indicative of your life. You feel like the storm clouds are rolling in and the rain is pouring and the waves are being whipped up. And maybe you're even saying, where is Jesus? Where is Jesus in this? And maybe you even feel a little bit mad at God and you're asking, like the disciples did, don't you even care, Jesus, if we drown? See, storms have a way of making us desperate. desperate for rescue, desperate for comfort. But I wonder sometimes, like the disciples in that boat, do we miss the comfort that was right there with us all along? Jesus was there. He never actually left them. But they were fishermen. They were in their zone, right? They were feeling accomplished and they were competent and they were really experienced at what they did. And I actually wonder, did they say to Jesus, "Go lie down, Jesus, we've got this. We'll handle it." And then they tried to deal with the storm on their own, in their own strength. And it wasn't until the point that they'd exhausted everything within them, exhausted their own strength, that they panicked. And then they called out to Jesus. And I wonder how many times in our lives we are like the disciples. I've got this, God. I can handle it. I can do it in my own strength. And I'm not just talking about the storms of life now. I'm talking about all of life. How often do we hold on to the control that we think that we have? If I'm a disciple of Jesus, am I truly letting him rule and reign in every part of my life? Am I really and honestly able to say that I am surrendering all, giving him full authority to every part of my life, listening and obeying, seeking his presence, abiding in him, connected to the vine? What I thought of when I read this passage was that I remembered a time that my family took a little boat trip over to Heron Island. And I think I've shared this with you before. But there was no storm, but it was really rough. It was like so rough that the hint should have been that on the counter when you checked in, they had a bowl of help yourself to these travel sickness tablets. That kind of rough. And 3/4 of the passengers were literally every shade of green that you could imagine. And I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but I have never thrown up so much in my life. It was so terrible. And head down on a table, I'd fill a bag, and then just the very motion of holding it up for the very patient and wonderful stewards to come and collect would be enough motion to cause me to fill another bag. It was really, really bad. And when I did lift my head just for a moment to look around, what I noticed and what really struck out to me was that the little kids who were scared in the midst of this massive swell, they were clinging to their parents. They were literally burying their heads into their parents' chests as we made our way through the rough waters. The Bible tells us that Jesus had to actually remind his disciples to not hinder the little kids from coming to him. Kids were drawn to Jesus. And it also tells us in the Bible that we should approach our Heavenly Father in the same way, like kids, childlike faith. And Christmas time to me is such a reminder of what childlike faith looks like. You know what I think? It's just my imagination again. But if there had been kids on the boat that night in the middle of the storm, I reckon they would have been found just curled up next to Jesus, the safest place on the boat. And I wonder how many times during this journey of life, whether the sun is shining and it's a beautiful day or the storm clouds are swirling, do we forget that God is in our boat? God, the creator of the universe, the living God, is in the boat with us. You are never alone. You don't need to live life in your own strength, with your own abilities. All we need to do is surrender, to lift our eyes off the circumstance and up to Jesus, to cling to him, to bury ourselves in his chest, to rest and to dwell and to abide in the presence of our God. I wonder if those who are serving communion would just begin to distribute. We're going to have communion together this morning. And if you're watching with us online, you could go ahead and grab something that you can use to represent the elements at home as well. I'm going to ask the music team to come as well. And we're going to just take a moment to just pause and consider together the grand miracle of Jesus. And I don't know everyone here this morning, and I don't know everybody that's watching online. I don't know all of your stories. And maybe this Christmas, you are not feeling like it's the most wonderful time of the year. Maybe instead of that, you are feeling stressed and you're feeling sad. Maybe this Christmas, you are feeling abandoned and rejected by a spouse or by a family member, thank you, Jackie, or by a child or by a friend, and your heart is aching. Maybe this Christmas is the first Christmas for you with an empty seat at the table because this year you've farewelled someone that you love. That's our story this Christmas, having recently farewelled our beloved grandma. Perhaps this Christmas you are feeling alone, anxious, worried, concerned. Maybe you are just overwhelmed and exhausted. In the midst of a storm, in the deepest part of the valley, and in the barrenness of the wilderness, I want to remind you this morning that God is with you. You can find joy in the presence of our God. His presence gives you courage and peace when you're afraid. His presence gives strength when in your own self you are weak. God gives you rest when you are weary. And he comforts you when you're hurting. Whatever struggle or trial or agony you are facing this Christmas time, lift your eyes to Jesus. Spend time with him. Abide in his presence and connect to the vine. You know, Psalm 16, verse 11, David wrote these words well before Jesus came. But this is what he said: "You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." What fills me with joy? His presence. And what is the path of life that David was referring to? God making known? Well, we know now, don't we? It was the promised one, Jesus. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. And Jesus might be the narrow path, but oh, what joy when you discover his forgiveness and his grace and his mercy and his love. May you find joy in his presence this Christmas time as you remember the grand miracle of Christmas, that God is with you. Christmas could be summed up simply: God loves us. The story of Christmas is the story of God's relentless love for each and every one of us. He took the initiative. He loved first, and then it's up to us. How will we respond?